So, Arthur, thanks for joining us. Sorry, we had a little technical difficulty, but we got you now. You got a great piece out there. Arthur is the editor of the American Conservative, talking about the voice of America, which is supposed to be this independent arm, the voice of the people. And it turns out that it's infected like the coronavirus with former Obamaites and China apologists. What do American people need to know about what's happening with the Voice of America, Arthur?
Yeah, so the latest controversy has been a lot of people jumped on Trump for talking about this in the Rose Garden. He said that there are bad people at VOA, and kind of the interpretation so far has been he's trying to get his guys in as chairman. His name is Michael Pack. He's the producer of a recent documentary about Clarence Thomas, actually, quite good one. And basically, so this is a public broadcaster. This is it's part of a bureau that also puts out Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, or I'm sorry, Voice of Asia, a bunch of these other kind of state-funded broadcasters. And up to this point, as you said, it's been mostly used for sort of left-wing kind of journalism. And I think in the way that they've covered a whole lot of different issues, especially in Europe, they're pretty out of or inconsistent with what the Trump administration's own policies have been toward especially a lot of Europe. And so one of the things that I pointed out is, for example, they've been very hard on right-leaning governments in Italy and in Hungary and in Poland. It's this kind of narrative of it's basically we've got to anybody who looks like Trump in Europe, we've got to do something about.
So, it turns out also that while they try to paint themselves as this, independent wing, Voice of America, unconnected media, Amanda Bennett just so happens coincidentally to be married to this guy, Don Graham, who was the former owner of the Washington Post.
Yeah, that's right. And so you got to think about like this board of broadcasters. It's not an especially important job, right? It's the sort of job that gets handed out as a favor by an administration. So these jobs, both in under Republican and Democratic administrations, they've been sort of patronage appointments would be what you would call it. And Amanda Bennett is the current director of Voice of America. So she's part of this kind of social circle that stands to lose by Trump's new appointments. And so the reason why Amanda Bennett is sort of interesting. So Don Graham is the longtime publisher of the Washington Post, and one of the most vituperative attacks on Trump when he was kind of trying to crack down a little bit or get his guy into VOA came from this guy Colbert King. Who was a longtime deputy editorial page editor at the Washington Post. And so, in other words, he's defending his former boss's wife and how she's been reporting the news and all that. He said it was McCarthyism and all of this stuff. And so the thing is, they like to think of Voice of America as a independent journalistic outlet, but that's not really what it is, and it's not really what it was ever intended to be. It was started under the Roosevelt administration as part of the Office of Public Information, and so it does have this kind of purpose of supporting the American message abroad. Whether it makes more sense to do that and claim to be independent, I don't know. Maybe it does. But the fact of the matter is, it's just a question of whose propaganda they're going to be pushing. And right now, it's liberal internationalists and it's neocons, their propaganda, rather than something that would be more suited to the Trump administration.
So, is there a way? I know Obama appointed Andy Lack, who we all know was the head of NBC. Is there a way that
That's right.
is there a way that Trump can wrest control from these left wingers that have had control, and put some people in there, not even to take it all the way to the other side, but can we get some objectivity in what's supposed to be the voice of America?
Yeah, well, so Lack is no longer there. He was actually
Right.
only there for about 2 months. And during that time, interestingly enough, he took a trip to Ukraine. And this would have been in like 2015, 2016, right when a lot of these events of Russiagate were kind of happening. But yeah, the thing is the board that Trump wants to get Michael Pack in as chairman of, all of those people have to be confirmed by the Senate. And so, if there are ever any openings, for now with the Republican Senate, Trump has a chance to kind of swing it. But all of that basically depends on control of the Senate.
Well, it sure seems like it sure seems like they won't let the president get a lot of his appointees before the Senate. A few weeks back, he was screaming and yelling about ordering them back or closing down the Senate so he can make some recess appointments. This is just another area where we see parts of our own government that I guess Trump's outsiderism hasn't got to yet. But this is another place where we see American folks who have bastardized something that's supposed to be for all America and turned it into part of the propaganda machine for China.
That's right, and that's been the main criticism of the White House. They claim that Voice of America is pushing Chinese propaganda, but they have done a couple of. I wanted to kind of be a little bit fair to them. They've done a few tough stories on China. For example, they ran one story about how there were people being cremated alive in Wuhan, which is a horrifying detail. That people are being dragged off alive, stuffed into body bags, and then burned. So they have done some, and honestly, compared to what VOA, Radio Free Europe, these other properties are doing in Europe, doing stuff that's critical of China is probably the best thing VOA could be doing at the moment.
Wow. So, well, look, it sure seems like you guys at the American Conservative are trying all you can to keep the attention on this, with so much other stuff going on. It's probably hard to get this to the forefront as a primary issue. But I think, and the reason that I wanted to have you on was I think it's important that Americans know that there are simple. This is supposed to be like a utility, which is open to everyone, regardless of political leanings. And it seems like it's been hijacked by the left, and it's another area where Trump's got to drain the swamp.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So how do we drain the swamp?
Well, when it comes to this one, this is an area, I guess, Radio Free Europe. So a few Trump appointees have. So the guy who runs Radio Free Europe now is Jamie Fly, who is, of course, a never Trumper. So why did the Trump administration put a never Trumper in charge of Radio Free Europe? That's a question I'd really like to know the answer to.
Yeah, I have found it strange myself. That as much as I love the president and the policies he came with and how he knocked off all these establishment Republicans to come in and put a new kind of president in the White House, I've still been completely perplexed by why he kept around war hawks like John Bolton, and he allowed people to stay within his administration. I don't know who gave him that guidance to allow people. He talked about let's end some wars. There were times when I made the point on this show right here that Donald Trump was a lot closer to Bernie Sanders on nationalism and bringing our troops home than he was to guys like John Bolton. But it seems somewhere in there, he had someone in his ear that was allowing these people, or at least assuring the president that these people weren't as bad as they're made out to be. And time again, it seems like he's getting bit by whoever gave him that advice, because we still have people that are known deep staters and known never Trumpers who somehow or another he's actually given credence to.
Yeah, and look, we could give this a charitable interpretation, and I guess that would be that Trump had to kind of make deals. He had to make peace with the Republican establishment after he won the primary. He's got to kind of bring those people over to his side, and he's got to work with them. And so maybe that means some of these appointments need to happen. But at the same time, you're right. A guy like Bolton absolutely does not share his philosophy with the world, and even his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. He's been a hawk his entire public career. And even now with coronavirus, he's still trying to start a war with Iran. Can you imagine, with the state we're in right now, if we were involved in a war with Iran, it would be a disaster. And so these people, I would hope that Trump could be Trump a little bit more, rather than having these kind of never Trumper or hawks kind of be getting their way.
Well, I have to say this, Arthur. As a guy with a vowel at the end of my name, I am proud to see another fellow with a vowel at the end of his name at such a high position as the Secretary of State. So I like sharing the nation of origin with our Secretary of State. I know he's known to be hawkish, but in some areas, I think he's been a more measured voice. I wish sometimes the president could take Mike Pompeo's tact and public communication styles and apply it to his messaging. And in one area, most recently, the left wing keeps telling us every single thing Trump does, he's going to get us in war with Russia. He's going to, help you. He's helping Russia with Ukraine, and he's going to get us in war with Iran. It seems like, Pompeo, or at least the forces like Pompeo, got the president to take out, Soleimani. And to me, that, while it was very provocative, and many on the left were saying he's taking us to World War III, it sure seems like between that and the coronavirus, it brought Iran to heel in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, I'm not a critic of the Soleimani strike, but it's definitely the case that the Hawks and his administration wanted to go further, and even now, that's kind of what Pompeo's been pushing for. And look, I mean, Pompeo's an evangelical. Who's ever heard of a Protestant Italian anyway?
Well, you got a good point there, but I'm ambidextrous on my actual church, but I am a faithful man, and whatever Christ-like being he goes for, I'm happy to know that he's got faith also. But it does seem like the president needs every tentacle he has to fight off all these dark forces all around Washington. And it would seem like, a little piece of media, or what some would perceive to be a little piece of media that broadcasts what's supposed to be the voice of America around the world. It's unfortunate that the president has to take time right now to even dig in there and try to get us some fair representation for all. But thank God for you guys at the American Conservative and pointing stuff like this out.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Arthur, thank you so much. I don't know where you are in America, but one of these days when Liquid Lunch is back in our studio in New York City, you got to come down and join me for a cocktail, and we'll wax poetic about how to drain the swamp. We'll need a few bottles probably. But Arthur Bloom from the American Conservative, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us today, guy. We got to have you back, brother.